Well, happy July, everybody. I know that we're all sad about June ending and the fact that we're not allowed to be gay anymore, but I'm still psyched because my birthday is on the 6th. I'm about to be at the prehistoric age of 23. So if you have any life tips about becoming an elder, definitely drop them down in the comments below. So as you saw by the title though, today we're going to be talking about everything that I watched in the month of June. And for whatever reason, I never really watched TV, but I finally caught up on some stuff this month, and so I have some TV shows to talk about. So I'm going to start with all the TV shows that I watched. Then I'm going to talk about every non-horror movie that I watched this month, and that'll also include some new releases. But if you want to skip that, then that's totally fair. I will have timestamps linked down below. The next portion of the video will be all of the movies that I have rewatched in the past month. Then I'll talk about all of my new horror watches, which that'll just include like anything that came out before 2021. And then finally, the last portion of this video, I will talk about all the new horror releases that I watched in the past month. So that'll actually be any horror movie that came out in the year 2022. But let's just kick it off, okay? First things first, we have Stranger Things. You already know, okay, if you've been around, if you joined that live stream where I talked about all things spoilers related to season 4 of Stranger Things, you know I love that show. We talked about everything, the characters, their development, the plot. We talked about some of our predictions for volume 2 of season 4. Highly recommend checking out that live, and that is also the longest form content that I have on my channel is all my live streams, and they are all in a playlist for you. Up next would be Slasher. I'm also not going to read the synopsis for this one because it doesn't really count. I only watched the first episode. That was a few weeks ago, and I never went back to it. I think I probably will though, because I've heard that it continues to get better with each season, and it is an anthology, but I just was not gripped by the first episode, so I know I need to go back and give it a fair shot, get more into it, but I didn't really like it. Didn't really feel gripped, you know? Up next though would be First Kill, which is something that I am very excited about. Falling in love is tricky for teens Juliet and Calliope because one's a vampire and the other's a vampire hunter, and both are ready to make their first kill. We got ourselves a gay little vampire show. When I talked about it a while back on a live stream, I told you guys that I wasn't super excited to finish the show because at that point I think I'd only watched the first 3 episodes or something. I'm so glad that I stuck it out and I watched the whole season. It's not a good show by any means, but it's still a show that we deserve. I actually ended up getting really invested in the storylines, and either the quality of each episode keeps getting better as you go, or I just got used to the low quality. I'm not sure which. I also talked about it at length on Patreon, so I'm not going to get as into it here. If you'd like to support me and get some bonus content, that'll also be linked down below. But in this show, one thing worth noting is that all of the action sequences are horribly made. The stunts are great. I think the fighting itself is pretty good, but the camera work and the editing, not so much. They just did a horrendous job matching action, so a lot of it is just very clunky and awkward. And if you don't know what matching action is, it's just when you cut from one shot to another and you try to, you know, it's a self-explanatory term. You just want to make the action look fluid, right? So they weren't quite accomplishing that in First Kill. However, it is actually high time that we have a cheesy, low-budget, bad gay vampire show. I'm pretty sure that they will get a second season. It was doing numbers for Netflix, and so I think that with the second season, I think that'll come with a bigger budget. I think that they will definitely, you know, up the quality of the show because there is so much potential there, and it's a little bit unfortunate I didn't get super into it until about episode 4, but you just have to give it a chance. The storylines are worth it. Also, it's giving Twilight. Calliope is this mysterious angel that just waltzes into the halls of the school, and Juliet is the awkward little lesbian that gets swept up in her wake. Sort of. It's a very interesting dynamic between a morally conflicted vampire fledgling and a vampire hunter prodigy. They couldn't have been more on the nose naming one of them Juliet, like come on. And then Calliope, who I think is the Greek goddess of poetry, some kind of goddess of poetry and spoken word or something. Usually an episode will start with Calliope narrating some kind of poetry. It's very much giving Bella. I never gave much thought to how I would die.
I've never given much thought to how I would die.
I'm not gonna lie, it does make me kind of sad that I didn't have any content like this growing up. I mean, all we had was Glee, and I don't think that really counts. Okay, that show was incredible, but it was awful. Anyway, that's enough about First Kill. I recommend the show, but I still would probably give it like a 2.5 out of 5. Next up, we have Keep Sweet, Pray, and Obey. This was gross. This is an American documentary miniseries on Netflix surrounding the polygamous fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, an offshoot of mainstream Mormonism and its current leader Warren S. Jeffs. Like I said, bloody disgusting! It was very much the same skin crawly vibes as Our Father, which we talked about during my May wrap-up. These are just my favorite kind of true crime documentaries because it is so fascinating. I've been very into cults lately. I've been binging so much anti-MLM content. Commercial cults especially are just bizarre. Like, I recommend looking into it. But this was beyond morbid. It was, you know, better than the murder cases because nobody's dying, but it was almost worse than the murder cases because these women were raised in a cult where they essentially had no form of autonomy. They didn't get to choose who they married, when they had sex, when they got pregnant. And watching these kind of documentaries and watching like anti-MLM content and stuff like that makes me feel better prepared, like more equipped to deal with stuff like that. Familiarizing yourself with the bite model of how cults work, I think is really important. People should do that because they're more prevalent than you would think. But the documentary was a surprisingly easy watch. I feel like it should have just been a documentary and not a docu-series because there's not much plot to it. I ended up kind of throwing it on in the background for the second and third episode because like every time that I would look up, it was just another woman talking about, oh yep, I married this guy who already had 30 wives. So it was just several accounts of the survivors, which is important because that's what the documentary should be about, you know, giving a platform to survivors. I would say that it's worth watching for the last episode, I guess, because that's when things really start to hit the fan. But other than that, I don't know, you could just kind of like read up on the situation. I'm sure that someone has broken it down on TikTok already. The last TV show that I want to talk about from this month would be Moon Knight, not horror. I'm not going to read out the synopsis. I've watched about half of it with my dad so far, or to be fair, like the first 3 episodes, and I'm not super into it. I'm gonna finish the show mainly because I really like the main character. I find him really intriguing. Big Oscar Isaac girl over here, by the way. Yummy. Very yummy, yummy man. I'm also very into Ethan Hawke. Ethan Hawke is so hot right now.
Hansel's so hot right now.
But the show just has a little bit too much like mystical mumbo jumbo stuff kind of going on for me. I think it's super dope that they are diving into Egyptian mythology because we haven't seen too much of that in like mainstream cultural stuff. But as it turns out in this show, it's just giving a little too much fantasy. I don't know, because I really love fantasy. But there is a surprising amount of horror in the show, so maybe some of you guys would be interested. Let's move on to every non-horror movie that I watched this past month though. Up next we have Duel. It's a movie about this woman who makes a clone of herself because she is dying of some rare disease, but she ends up surviving, and so she and her clone have to get into this fight to the death, and that's what the whole movie is about. And if you love dry humor, this movie will be for you. Generally, I can be pretty dry sometimes with like my joke delivery and stuff, but this movie is dry. Like bone dry humor. And not a fresh bone, more like a cow skull that has been hung up above a Westerner's mantelpiece. That kind of bone dry. I didn't find it funny. I was also very confused why Theo James was only in the first scene of the movie. This man deserves more, if for no other reason than he's really hot. I love the concept of the movie, but I wish that it had been done way better, so I gave it 2.5 stars out of 5. Then I watched Top Gun, the original one from the 80s, gave that one 3 stars. It's fine, but it's just really cheesy, typical 80s stuff. Good soundtrack though. Now Top Gun Maverick, this movie is cinema, okay? I don't think I need to read the synopsis. It's about planes and men being hot. So you want to guess my favorite thing about this movie? It's raining men. Hallelujah, it's raining man. Ooh, everyone was fine as hell in this movie. I left a horny ass review on Letterboxd. I'm sorry if your children saw that, but also not really. It's not my job to raise them. No one said I had to set a good example for the youth. I said every character in this movie I would have sex with, and it's true, even the older characters. And it's a stunning film, real life dog fighting with these military jets. Oh, almost no CGI. It's truly a dying breed of action movie, and I'm so happy that it's doing well. Up next, not gonna dwell on this one, would be the Bob's Burgers movie. I don't want to talk about this. It's so boring. I like the show. I've seen about 4 seasons of it by now, and this was just like a really long episode of a show with random musical numbers thrown in. And whoever made the decision to make this kind of a musical, jail.
Right to jail, right away.
Commit to it or leave the musical numbers out, okay? It's rated highly though by a lot of fans of the show, so I guess I'm in the minority, but it was just beyond mediocre. It seems like if you love and adore the show, then you're gonna love the movie, but I guess as a more casual fan of the show, for me it was really boring, so I don't know, couldn't tell you. Up next, a gay little flick that I'm so excited about would be Fire Island. This was one of my absolute favorites of the month by a long shot. A group of queer best friends gather in the Fire Island Pines for their annual week of love and laughter, but when a sudden change of events jeopardizes their summer in gay paradise, their bonds as a chosen family are pushed to the limit. When this movie started, I was giving my friend Tiago kind of a live reaction to it, and at first I said, oh god, like this movie is so corny, this is not about to be good. Because a lot of the dialogue is super cringy, very corny, feels like the opening of an early 2000s teen comedy, but it gets so good, and generally with comedies, watching anything funny, I prefer to do that with other people just because the shared experience always makes me laugh more. But I watched this by myself and I was busting up. I was laughing out loud by myself in my room. I think because I too had my own messy little gay group of friends and we would always go to festivals together, and it would always be like 5 of us in one hotel room, getting into mischief and substances we probably shouldn't, or it was all of us camping together and just getting absolutely obliterated. So this movie hit close to home, and it was also just a really fresh and unique story. And when was the last time that you watched a movie where the lead was a gay Asian man? It's extremely corny, but it's the gay coming of age story that I think a lot of us deserved when we were teenagers, and thank God we're getting it now. There really aren't enough true coming of age movies for, late 20-something, early 30-something adults. We're always coming of age. We should have those kind of movies for any age we are, not just high school. There are so many set in high school. Like, I love Booksmart, but it's basically just like our generation's version of Superbad. So I think that Fire Island is going to become an instant comfort classic for me, and I hope that they do a physical release, otherwise I have to keep Hulu until I die. The next movie wants to be an instant classic so bad, but it's just so bad. Senior year. Okay, Rebel Wilson, I was rooting for you.
We were all rooting for you! How dare you!
And I knew that this wasn't going to be good because Netflix original comedies are exclusively bad, but it felt like a good Pride Month moment. I really sympathize with Rebel Wilson, who was just forcibly outed by this horrible journalist. But the movie was ass cheeks, big ol' stinky doo-doo pile. Give it 1.5 stars out of 5. I think the biggest problem is just that it is nothing we haven't seen before. It has kind of a cute message about breaking the mean girl stigma, but it also feels really conflicted in that messaging, so I don't know if I want to give it credit there. It's also just not funny in the slightest. It's also great seeing Rebel Wilson's transformation. She seems to be, radiating health and seems to be a lot happier these days. Maybe it's because she also started dating a woman, but I thought that that would also mean that maybe she would start branching out in her career. But this is yet another movie where she plays the exact same character again. In Pitch Perfect, Hustle, Isn't It Romantic, and now this, she is playing herself essentially in every movie. She played a real oddball character in Bridesmaids, and that was by far probably her best ever performance. Whatever, I don't want to talk about that anymore. Up next, we have Lightyear. I don't have much to say about this one either. It's really mediocre for a Pixar movie. Still made me cry at one point like every other Pixar movie in existence, but it's still very meh. I found a Letterboxd review that sums it up perfectly. Top Gun Lightyear, Interstellar Edition. It is basically a combination of all of those movies. I could not have said it better myself. It's just nothing that we haven't seen before. Cute message, but lame overall. Shout out to Chris Evans though for calling homophobic people idiots that'll die off like dinosaurs. I know it's the bare minimum, but hey, he's an ally. Just insane that people are so violently homophobic that Pixar will throw the gays a crumb by showing a same-sex couple via a montage, okay? They're on screen for like less than a minute overall, and there's one little peck and people lose their minds. I think that Chris Evans honestly said it best, and he should say it. Not patting him on the back, just letting it be known that he is acting correct in this situation. Just a couple other non-horror movies. Up next we have The Worst Person in the World. More like the most average person in the world. The gist of this movie is both very elevating and very depressing, but it's basically that there is no destination in life, there is only the journey. And there is no certainty except for loss. You will never be 100% certain of your profession or even the person that you love, so you just have to make a bunch of these choices and hope for the best. But the good news is we're all in the same boat, so you're not alone. It's a fine movie, there's no plot really, it's just one of those slice of life things where they chronicle 4 years in the life of this character. Not much much to criticize, gave it 4 out of 5 stars, but I probably wouldn't watch it again. Next we have The Fifth Element, this super bizarre 90s sci-fi movie with Bruce Willis. Not gonna spend any time here because I went with my dad to the 25th anniversary showing that Fathom Events was putting on, and we walked out of the movie after I think less than an hour. It was very bad, horrible even. So moving on, as for the last non-horror release that I watched this past month would be Minions: The Rise of Gru. Don't see this movie. Don't do it. I don't know what kind of shenanigans that people are on about on Twitter. People are trying to do the same thing that they did with Morbius, where they are just memeing the hell out of it and claiming that it's the best release of 2022. No! You can't top what happened with Morbius. Stop trying to make it happen. Stop trying to make Minions happen. I think my experience can be summed up via a dramatic reading of my Letterboxd review. I may never recover from the amount of minion ass I've seen on this day. And it's true, there's so much ass in this movie. And not just minion ass too, there's a little bit of child ass. So it's not for me, is it? Let's move on to all the movies that I rewatched in June. Up first we have It Follows, kind of a cult classic. It's about this girl that gets stalked by a monster that can change form, can look like anybody, you know, a friend or a stranger. And it only walks, but it never stops until it kills you. Oh, also, it is sexually transmitted. I should not have watched this movie alone, I fear, because holy fuck. I have a lot to say about this movie because I haven't watched it in a while. Let's start with the opening of this movie and just take a gander at what this girl is wearing. Why did they make her run around in heels, and just in general, what is she wearing? What is this? That's the only thing that I'm not on board with about the opening. Otherwise, I think it is one of the best opening to a horror movie in history because it really sets the tone and then it just keeps going. This movie is visceral and dark. It Follows just has so many layers to unpack. Number 1, trust who you have sex with. Number 2, yes, STDs are scary, so get tested, you goblins. That responsibility should never fall on just one member of the having sex party. Everyone should get regularly tested, okay, you ghouls? Number 3, all the different forms that the it creature took. The tall guy, oof, not him, not him. And number 4, it is a gorgeous movie. So much visceral storytelling within the composition. I was inspired to give this one a rewatch because this month I also watched the new Maika Monroe thriller called Watcher, and we will get into that very soon. Maika Monroe just has a good agent. I don't know. Also, did you know she was dating Joe Keery? Because I didn't. But she is the indie scream queen of my dreams. Up next, I rewatched Shrooms, which is a movie that I have not seen since my youth. A group of teenagers travel to Ireland to experience the trip of a lifetime, as promised by their Irish friend and hallucinogens expert Jake. As gruesome events unfold, the friends can't distinguish between hallucination and reality. Now, this movie is the self-proclaimed Blair Witch Project on acid. Now, that's a crazy claim for a movie to make when it cannot handle a realistic trip at all. Also, why does it say Blair Witch Project on acid when Shrooms is literally in the name? Let's say that I had hypothetically done a bunch of shrooms at one point in my life. Then I could hypothetically tell you it is one of the worst depictions of psychedelics I've ever seen. The amount of tea that they all shared from this tiny little pot was nothing, and yet they have these dumbasses out here hallucinating talking cows.
Believe it or not, jail, right away.
The most accurate depiction I've ever seen of shrooms is definitely in Midsommar. Super realistic visuals and doesn't go too far over the top, especially considering the state of mind that this girl is in. So Shrooms was a letdown because I have to imagine it might have actually cost them more money to do all of that stupid shit than it would have if they made it more realistic. But of course, if they made it realistic, then half the stuff that happens in the movie would not have happened. It's really dumb though, and it kind of has a cheesy charm, so it's pretty entertaining. But I was just so annoyed because this type of thing just further stigmatizes psychedelics. Did you know that they have been conducting studies where they have found success in treating depression with psilocybin? No, probably not, because most movies treat them like Shrooms does. Anyway, this movie acts like if you all share a pot of shrooms, then you will collectively hallucinate things to a schizophrenic degree. I don't think that that's going to be a problem for most people because it's just a horror movie, it's just meant to entertain. I just find it really distracting because had they made a realistic bad trip, it would have been 10 times more terrifying than that garbage. This basura. But I'd probably watch it again, to be honest. I actually really liked this movie when I was a teenager, so it was disappointing to watch it again and find out that it is so bad. Not this next one though. I also rewatched The Thing because Fathom Events again did another anniversary showing of this movie. The first time seeing this movie in a theater was pretty surreal, and I also got drunk. I didn't even mean to get that drunk though. I only had 2 Modelo's, and maybe it was because I didn't eat enough for dinner. I don't know. Although granted, I had smoked a little bit before I went in, so all right. But I still had no business being as drunk as I was. I don't know what happened, honestly. It made the movie even better though, and I was even more gripped, so riddle me the science behind that. Up next we have The Sting. Now this movie is an absolute certified classic. It's from 1973, stars Robert Shaw of Jaws, also stars Paul Newman and Robert Redford, and it's about this group of street swindlers who try to pull off the ultimate con. I grew up on this movie because of my grandpa, so I've been rewatching a lot of his favorites since he passed away a couple months ago. But yeah, this movie is great. I literally learned The Entertainer on piano because of it, and it's not perfect, but it's just a good ass time. And if you're a movie buff in general, it's one that you should definitely see. Next, I'm not gonna go over every single one of these movies, but that would be the entire Jurassic Park franchise. I love every movie in that franchise except for Dominion, which I only liked. But if you missed it, I have an entire live stream that I did with my dad where we talked all spoilers about Dominion and we ranked the entire franchise with you guys. So definitely check that out. But up next, I went back to the theater to watch The Black Phone because my dad wanted to see it for Ethan Hawke. And I felt pretty much the exact same this time around. It was a little bit more boring than the first time, I'll say, but I already dedicated an entire review to that movie, so you can also check that out as well. Let's finally get to all of my new horror watches. These are all horror movies that came out prior to 2022 that I have just watched for the first time. Up first would be the 1970 Crimes of the Future. I talked about this very briefly during my Crimes of the Future review, but it's very boring and I didn't like it. Up next we have The One I Love. What a film. I know it's not horror, but it's very psychological. A couple whose marriage is crumbling have a surreal experience during a weekend getaway at a house recommended by their therapist. Now you can watch this one on HBO Max right now and I highly recommend it. I'm realizing more and more how much I love Mark Duplass. He directs and produces some of the most amazing, unique, low-budget stuff I've ever seen. So far I've seen Creep, Safety Not Guaranteed, Baghead, and now The One I Love. I've enjoyed every single one, and The One I Love is probably my favorite out of all of them. And I recommend going in as blind as possible. This movie is very strange. He's so good at making movies that are high concept and yet work so well within the constraints of a low budget. He stars in it with Elizabeth Moss, and like I said, it's a very psychological movie. I know it's not horror, but I think that conceptually it'll really mess with you, so I still recommend it to horror fans. It's just a really fun mindfuck. Moving on, we have The Stylist. I think that you can watch this one on Shudder. Hairstylist by day, serial killer and collector of scalps by night, Claire's lonely existence is thrown into turmoil when her regular client Olivia asks her to style her hair for her wedding day. This movie is gonna do it for some people, and I'm happy for them. I am. It was not for me. There are things that are cool about this movie for sure. I think the storyline itself could have been super interesting if the movie itself wasn't so dry. I think my gripes come down to the cinematography and the editing. The editing felt off. It felt like they could have trimmed off so much of the fat, because I think this easily could have been an hour and 20 minutes instead of an hour and 40 minutes. There was just so much dead air between lines of dialogue, which I think goes in tandem with my next point. It was also the most stagnant movie I've ever seen. I see a lot of people praising the cinematography, and I'm like, girl, do you mean the lighting? It has pretty lighting sometimes, but there is no movement to the camera work. They really just said, tripod. It's just so boring to the eye, especially during conversational scenes. They didn't even bother to get coverage, which means like usually with a dialogue scene, you start off with a wide to like establish the shot, establish the space, and then you'll cut to like over the shoulder shots or something of each actor while they converse, and you get closer up, you get to read more expressions in their face, and it's just more dynamic, more movement, more interesting to the eye. Which like, okay, it's kind of impressive that they got a ton of these scenes in one shot, but I never got to have a really intimate encounter with any of the characters. So my eyes were just so bored because nothing ever moved in this movie. So whatever, not really for me. Moving on to In the Mouth of Madness, one of John Carpenter's 90s flicks. When horror novelist Sutter Kane goes missing, insurance investigator John Trent scrutinizes the claim made by his publisher. He then endeavors to retrieve a yet-to-be-released manuscript and ascertain the writer's whereabouts. After watching The Thing, I just felt like giving the boy John Carpenter a little more screen time, so I threw this one on because I'd never seen it before. And this movie is real weird. god, like, whoa. I think it's a super cool concept. There are some pretty great practical effects. It's very cerebral, but it kind of falls apart after the halfway mark for me. I see a lot of love for this movie on Letterboxd though, so maybe you would like the movie more than I did, but I just cannot shake the weirdness of this movie, and it's just like Event Horizon for me, where I was not prepared for Sam Neill to be in such a weird movie. And also now you guys are telling me it's the same thing for the movie he was in called Possession. I don't know if I'm ready for that. My Jurassic Park man has gotten himself into one too many a strange flick, I fear. Is that why he didn't really do anything in the early 2000s? Also worth noting, I think that this is his only performance where his New Zealand accent just kind of halfway slips throughout the movie. Since when was he ever bad at the American accent? I don't understand. But it just wasn't for me. It went a little bit too off the deep end, and not in a way that I felt like really contributed to any of the meaning of the movie or really even the plot. It was just kind of like, hey, here's another weird visual. What you gonna do about that? And I don't know. I say that we move on to all the new horror releases that I watched in the month of June. Up first, we have Crimes of the Future, the return of David Cronenberg. Like I mentioned, I did a whole review on this baby, but I did want to include a clip from this video that I found on Twitter. It was an interview that he did after my initial review came out.
When I wrote it 20 years ago, I wasn't thinking of that specifically, but this is always a go-round about who controls the bodies of the citizens, who controls women's bodies, who controls the bodies of transgender people, it's like, are you allowed to do that? Can the government actually tell you what to do with your body and not, even if it doesn't affect anybody else? It becomes a kind of a hot button.
I hadn't even thought of that, but damn. But he related the themes of his movie to how our American government tries to control the bodies of trans people. Highly recommend checking out that film and my solo review that I did. I feel like it's one of the better reviews that I've ever made, and it was my best performing video of the last month, so the numbers don't lie, babes. Up next, we have Watcher, which is a movie that I gave a perfect score. Like, what? As a serial killer stalks the city, a young actress who just moved to town with her boyfriend notices a mysterious stranger watching her from across the street. I felt this movie in my soul. One of the common critiques that I see about this movie is that there just isn't quite enough buildup, and the payoff to that buildup is also less than exciting. And let me tell you, if you had any experiences related to what happens in this movie, you are gonna be in it. And honestly, a lot of those complaints I see are from men, and it's like, of course you don't get it. Regardless of that though, I think that this movie does an amazing job of putting you in the perspective of the lead. The cinematography is also beautiful, and it does so much of the storytelling. There are some moments where it's really overt. This woman, she moved to a country with her husband. He is a Romanian-born citizen, and she's American, so she is an immigrant, and she's trying to adjust to this new, weird, different life. And you really feel the isolation of that. So one moment where the cinematography is really dramatic is she's leaving this event because she feels like, her husband is paying her no mind. So you see a shot of her leaving this beautiful building, and up at the top of the stairs, you see all the guests, and they're all in the gala, and then the stairs kind of come underneath that balcony, so then she is all by herself under there. So it's pretty on the nose, but it's also just this gorgeous shot. But then also, the cinematography has so much subtlety to it at times. An example of this movie really sucking you in is when our lead has to have physical contact with the man she believes to be stalking her. It's just a handshake, but the close-ups and this deafening silence followed by the light scruffle of their hands touching is just bleh. So visceral while not even doing that much. That's something that I tried to do with my upcoming short Somnum, which I really hope reads in the same way, where you take a really common moment like a handshake, but you dive into it, you expand on it to make it something really disturbing. And Watcher is full of those kind of moments. Finding the spooky in the ordinary is not a common skill, I feel like, and I'm really excited to see what this director does next. Chloe Okuno, what has she done before? Oh, right, okay, so she directed one of the segments in VHS 94. So that was one of my absolute favorite movies that I watched this past month, one of the few movies on my Letterboxd I've ever given a perfect score. But let's move on to one of my least favorites of the month. That would be Dashcam. At the start of the pandemic, an indulgent and self-deluded live streaming improv musician abandons LA for London. She steals her ex-bandmate's car and makes the wrong decision to give a ride to an elderly woman who is not what she seems. First off, what the hell is Blumhouse doing platforming a person like this? No, she doesn't look good in the movie, but off-screen you are giving a horrible person a much bigger platform. She might not be as extreme off-screen, but she's pretty extreme. If you just take a gander at her Twitter, it's a weird place. By platforming this person, it actively enables her behavior, and it platforms her ideology that specifically puts disabled people at risk. This is also by Rob Savage, the guy that did Host, and I didn't like Host either. The only reason why I think that everybody freaked out about Host is because it was relevant to living in a pandemic, and so it was super relatable for everyone. But go back and watch it again. Did that movie do a single groundbreaking thing? No. It used cheap scares and it copied a bunch of our other favorite found footage movies, and Dashcam did the exact same thing. Some of the horror elements were fine, but there was no connection between them, and it was mostly just loud is scary. There isn't actually a storyline at all, no plot, just a bunch of wild shit that happens. And I love found footage. I think it is one of the most overlooked subgenres of film, but when the character keeps filming themselves for literally no reason, that is when I have to call it a hack. And embarrassingly, Annie Hardy is probably the most entertaining part of this movie. The first 15 minutes were insufferable because she was just causing a racist, anti-vax ruckus, but then when things would go down, her profane humor is actually kind of what got me through all the nonsense. But don't support this movie. Don't send the message to Blumhouse that it's okay to platform anti-vax people. So not to dwell, let's move on to Deadware, yet another found footage movie. In 1999, two friends use a webcam for the first time and stumble across a mysterious browser game that may be haunted. So this movie sounds really cool, right? And for about the first half, it is. But then things really took a turn, and not for the better, babes. It was a really cool concept, and I would love to see more stuff like this, but there were just certain limitations that I think were kind of holding it back. And you might think that because it takes place in 1999, the look of the movie might kind of hold it back, like the look of the game, but that was actually the coolest and creepiest part of this movie. I was feeling the suspense, and I even felt a little bit scared at times. Unfortunately, things just really ended up kind of falling apart by the third act. I only rated it 2.5 out of 5 stars because with all the potential that it built up in the beginning, it just all came crashing down. I recommend it though, just to, support indie creators and to support unique concepts. Up next, we have Monstrous, which is a new Christina Ricci movie. A terrifying new horror awaits Laura and her 7-year-old son Cody when they flee her abusive ex-husband and try to settle into a new life. Still traumatized, their physical and mental well-being are pushed to the limits as their fragile existence is threatened. That's a very weird and vague synopsis, I would say, but there's just not a whole lot to say about this movie either. Opposite to Deadware, I would say that the third act is definitely the best, but it is a trek to get there. There are really cool twists, albeit quite derivative of some other stories. If I even tell you the 3 movies I'm thinking of that I think this movie drew inspiration from, it would probably spoil the whole plot, but I don't really recommend the movie. It's kind of giving Mike Flanagan wannabe, where they captured his style and the style of it is really good, but they didn't manage to put in any substance. If it's ever streaming for free somewhere, then maybe check it out to see how you feel, but if you haven't noticed, nobody is talking about it, and kind of for good reason. I think it's one that's just gonna kind of fall off. Up next, we have Escape the Field. Now, I can't dwell because I didn't finish this one either, and I'm not gonna give you a synopsis either. It's about a bunch of characters that wake up in a field, and surprise, surprise, they have to escape the field. It was giving all the stereotypical character cliches of being stuck in a situation together. There was a nurse there, obviously, to tend to all the people. There was a big angry white guy. There was a timid college student, and then there was Mr. Reasonable. The guy who talks down the angry white guy and sort of manages order for the group. And there was no style to the movie. It was very boring to look at, and so I turned it off after about 40 minutes. Didn't feel compelled at all to make it to the end, and I will not lose sleep over that. Next, we have Jurassic World Dominion. Now, again, I already did that whole live stream, so be sure to check that out. All I will say is that this movie is atrocious, but I still liked it. I'm quite a sucker for those legacy characters, I have to admit. But last up for everything that I watched in the month of June would be Gatlop Hell of a Game. Now, this one was a big surprise. Mischief leads to mayhem when 4 friends play a drinking game that forces them to face their inner demons. They soon realize that if they can't come together to win the game by sunrise, they'll be forced to play for eternity in hell. I ended up giving this movie 4 stars because I thoroughly enjoyed it. I do not think that everyone is going to enjoy it as much as I did, so maybe manage your expectations a little bit, but anyways, I don't know if you guys have ever seen a little movie called Zathura, but I was obsessed with this movie as a kid. Also, one of Kristen Stewart's, if not her first big feature role. So Gatlop is a lot like Zathura and Jumanji, just with a lot more alcohol. And with more complex adult relationships and life lessons. It does have some issues though. There's really gimmicky editing to the point where it's a little bit more distracting than it is cool, but I still appreciate the effort. Some of the dialogue is also quite bad and a little bit cliched, and maybe we've heard it before. And also it's obviously not super original in premise, but there are still some very surprising and unique moments in the movie. I also loved all these characters. The movie did such a good job of getting me to care about all these goofballs and all the intricacies of their relationships. There's a lot of drama that's slowly revealed world over the course of the game, and I was completely invested. It was goofy and cliched, but ultimately the lessons that they were trying to get across about what it means to be human I thought was great. It was actually really giving the same vibe as The Worst Person in the World, where none of us are bad people, we're just people. Most of us are messy as hell, and that's okay. I will say I'm not entirely sure why it's listed as a horror comedy. It is very, very light on the horror, but it's a fun time. I laughed. And on that note, we end today's Letterboxd recap. As always, I want to thank my lovely patrons for funding this channel and allowing me to do what I do. If you would like to support me further, you can find my Patreon listed down below. Like I mentioned, I also post a lot of bonus content over there. You can also find the GoFundMe for my short film we're currently funding to try to get this movie sent into festivals. And also, it'll be released in just a couple days. Oh my god, it might already be out by the time you see this. But yeah, that's gonna do it. You can also find all my other social media down below. Follow me everywhere, especially on TikTok. My TikTok is starting to pop off just a little bit, so that's exciting. But yeah, other than that, I hope that you enjoyed this video, and I hope you have a great day. Bye!